Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman will join us shortly. Here's what we're looking at. A WTTW News exclusive, the city is on track to spend a record amount of police overtime this year. We break down the numbers. And we track down 2 more private waste hauling companies making illegal early morning pickups.
Northwestern failed to protect us.
Lawsuits mount against Northwestern over hazing allegations. And Chicago's Inspector General ups the ante on investigations into ethics violations. First to Brandis with our top story of the evening. Brandis.
Chicago is on track to spend a record amount on police overtime this year. That's according to new findings from records obtained by WTTW News reporters Heather Sharon and Jared Rutecki. And Heather joins us now with more. Heather, break down these numbers for us. How has the first half of 2023 fared?
Well, Chicagoans spent $126.5 million in police overtime in just the first 6 months of 2023. That is 50% more than the city spent on police overtime in 2022. And it took the city just 5 months to exhaust its budget for the entire year, which had been set at just $100 million.
Okay, so sounds pretty fast. What about last year's numbers, 2022?
So in 2022, the police department spent $210.5 million on police overtime, and that was an increase of 56% as compared to 2021. So as you can see, this isn't just an anomaly. This is the latest in a series just of massive police overtime spending.
What has CPD had to say about the overtime spending?
Well, they say they work to review operations to ensure that taxpayer money is spent efficiently and effectively, but that they're coping with the staffing crunch, which is affecting police departments across the nation, and that they have to police a number of large events that is returned to the city now that the COVID-19 pandemic has waned, and that has made it difficult to ensure proper staffing.
Any sense of what the city's tap for police overtime in the second half of 2023 might look like?
So if this rate continues, the city will end the year spending nearly $250 million on police overtime, which would be a new record. Now, I should say that this data only goes through June 30th, so we don't know how much the police department spent on overtime over the 4th of July weekend, typically one of the most violent and one where officers had their regular days off canceled. Also, you might remember a little event called NASCAR Chicago. So it's not clear how much the race itself boosted overtime spending, but you can bet Jared and I will ask.
I'll bet you will. We'll be listening out for you when you're done. Heather Sharon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather and Jared's full story on our website. It is all at WTTW.com/news. Now back to Paris and more of today's top stories. Paris.
Brandis, don't expect any labor strikes or unrest when Chicago hosts the Democratic National Convention next summer. Labor unions and public officials signed what they're calling a labor peace agreement to ensure all goes smoothly during the city's big time in the national spotlight. The deal was struck between the Chicago Host Committee, the Chicago Federation of Labor, and unions like IBEW Local 134, the Carpenters and Steelworkers unions, among many others. Governor J.B. Pritzker acknowledges the event will be a massive undertaking.
We've been working hard since day one to put together the necessary resources to put on the best convention ever. It will be a larger convention, a larger endeavor than has ever been put on before by the Democratic National Convention, and so that means a larger fundraising effort.
Disturbing new numbers coming out of the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. The office reports 2,000 opioid overdose deaths for 2022. That breaks the previous record set the year prior at 1,935. More than 90% of the opioid deaths this year were related to fentanyl, according to the Examiner's Office. Fentanyl-related opioid deaths have skyrocketed since 2016, when the office recorded only 676 deaths. Chicago and Mississippi are now home to the country's newest national monument. It's named for Emmett Till, whose death helped spark the civil rights movement, and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley. Vice President Kamala Harris notes today's proclamation comes amid debate over how to teach painful facts about American history.
And as people who love our country, as patriots, we know that we must remember and teach our full history. even when it is painful, especially when it is painful.
Till was 14 years old when he was abducted, tortured, and killed in Mississippi after a white woman accused him of whistling at her. The monument includes the Roberts Temple Church of God in Christ, where Till's mother insisted on an open casket funeral to show her son's mutilated body. The monument also includes 2 sites in Mississippi. Up next, why residents in Lakeview East are getting a rude awakening. We explain that right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
When it's not 90 degrees and full of haze, summer is a time to leave the windows open overnight to catch some fresh air while you sleep. But for some Chicagoans, the early morning air is also filled with the sound of illegal trash pickups. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg has more on a story that he has been covering closely. Nick.
Well, Paris, under the city's ordinance, private waste haulers cannot make noisy pickups before 7 a.m. But after we reported on one company flouting the law, we got even more tips from viewers and readers about other sanitation scofflaws. So we woke up very early to catch them in the act.
Briar between Orchard and Halstead, 5:31 a.m.
It's bright and early in Lakeview East, and this Republic Services truck is up and at 'em a full 90 minutes before it's supposed to be making pickups.
That's what we're looking for.
Republic?
After our last story about Groot making illegal pickups in Rogers Park, we heard from some longtime Lakeview residents who said Republic Services has been waking them up early
ever since I can remember.
Tom Hope has lived in Lakeview for about 30 years.
This block to the south has no alley, so they do it all in the street here, which makes it worse. They've been here as early as like 5:30.
We recently saw Republic making multiple stops in Hope's neighborhood between 5:30 and 6 a.m. The driver didn't seem put off when our photographer got up close and personal. Hope says the problem is even worse during the summer when people leave their windows open.
It gets noisy. It wakes a lot of people up.
Something you hear about from your neighbors?
Yeah.
After following Republic for a while, we drove around the neighborhood to see if there were any other dumpster delinquents out on the streets. Lo and behold, we came across a Lakeshore recycling truck near Southport and Addison a few minutes after 6 a.m. This driver didn't seem much bothered by us either. Lakeshore Recycling did not respond to a request for comment. As for Republic, the company that's been waking the Hopes up for years on end, they told us in an email that, quote, "We work diligently to plan our routes so that they conform with applicable ordinances. We work closely with ward superintendents so that we may resolve any complaint that arises in a timely manner."
My wife has called 311 a number of times, and she's also called the alderman's office a few times, and they try to help, but there's only so much they can do.
What do you hope might come of this?
Well, that they could do something to where they figured they couldn't get away with it anymore. That would be nice.
44th Ward Alderperson Bennett Lawson tells us if waste haulers aren't following the noise ordinance, residents should call the ward office to let staff know what day and time companies are coming. He says the 44th Ward superintendent then pays those drivers a visit to warn them about the law or risk a ticket. And Paris Lawson said the ward sup hasn't yet had to write one after a warning.
Seems like he might have to start writing some soon. Nick, how widespread is this problem?
Well, we don't really know. No city department was able to provide overall information on how many complaints come in each year or how many fines are issued. And the city doesn't appear to have a way of tracking or responding to these rude awakenings in any sort of a centralized way. Now, you can call 311 or, as we mentioned, your alderperson's office, and from there, as in the 44th Ward, The Department of Streets and Sanitation ward superintendent is supposed to reach out to the companies and remind them to follow the law, a localized approach that Lawson and others say makes sense. Now, a Streets and Sanitation spokesperson tells us that department takes noise complaints regarding private waste haulers very seriously, and that the police are the lead department for enforcement, which of course, Paris, means fines.
All right, Nick, very early mornings there for you. On the lookout. Thanks very much.
No problem.
And up next, the latest on hazing allegations at Northwestern University. Stay with us.
The allegations are disturbing. Former Northwestern University athletes say the hazing they endured during their playing days was degrading, traumatic, and according to one lawsuit, caused physical as well as psychological harm. Here's former Northwestern quarterback Lloyd Yates.
Nudity, performing acts while being nude, that, is so normalized in the culture. That's just, coming from high school, that stuff, we never did any of that stuff. That we weren't, that we just thought that this was, part of being, playing college football, playing Big Ten, and we wanted to, be accepted.
Joining us now are two attorneys for former Northwestern University athletes. Stephen Levin with the firm Levin & Perconti. He's representing former football players with co-counsel Ben Crump. And Jennifer Cascio, attorney with Salvi, Shostak & Pritchard. She represents the women's volleyball player who filed suit yesterday. We invited attorneys for Northwestern University and Coach Pat Fitzgerald, but they declined. Jennifer and Steve, thanks to the two of you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Steve Levin, let's start with you, please. Your co-counsel called this scandal the Me Too of college hazing. Talk a little bit about that. How many athletes are we talking about potentially suing Northwestern University?
Potentially, we're talking about hundreds of athletes. The conduct that we're alleging in the lawsuit goes back decades. It was in the football program in particular, it was ritualized. It had its own sick traditions. It had its names for the various aspects of the sexually humiliating acts they forced the players to go through. And it's just hard to tell how many people, but it appeared to occur in every year, in every class, for 20 years or potentially even more.
If it goes back that far, then that means it, has the potential to have happened under previous coaches and directors and presidents of Northwestern University.
It's our belief that this is an institutional problem. This is a university problem. This is a Northwestern problem. There was many different administrative officials, many different coaches who coached these young athletes over the course of these years. But we're not focusing on any individual. We're focusing on the institution.
Jennifer Cascio, you're representing, as we said, the first woman to sue Northwestern for hazing on the volleyball team. She reported needing medical treatment after a hazing incident. The coach was there and suspended, but that contract was renewed. What does this tell you about how seriously the university was taking hazing allegations at the time?
Well, I think what it tells us is obviously it wasn't taking it very seriously. The coach witnessed the hazing. The coach was suspended for a very brief period of time. And then ultimately, after he was suspended, his contract was renewed, and there was glowing remarks about him when his contract was renewed. And so there really was no mention of the hazing incident publicly. There was never anything shared with other members of other athletic programs. And what that tells us is there was a real lack of transparency. And that's what's evident here across all athletic programs, is that there was no transparency into the hazing incidents that occurred in the volleyball program as well as other programs.
Now, as we mentioned, of course, attorneys representing the university and former coach Fitzgerald declined to join us this evening, but we did receive a statement from Northwestern University that reads, quote, "Shortly after learning the results of the independent investigation into hazing on the football team, The university announced a series of steps, including the monitoring of the football locker room, anti-hazing training, and the establishment of an online reporting tool for complaints. These steps, while necessary and appropriate, are just the start. It goes on to say the university is working to ensure we have in place appropriate accountability for our athletic department. We will engage an outside firm to evaluate the sufficiency of our accountability mechanism and to detect threats to the welfare of our student athletes. Steve Levin, do you think Northwestern is doing enough? And if not, what kind of accountability would your clients like to see?
I think we should start with the proposition that this type of behavior could have been stopped instantly if the people who run the football program or who run the athletic department talked to every group of student athletes who came in every year and said, hazing will not be tolerated. If you haze, you'll be expelled from the program. That would have put an end to it. As far as we know, that never happened. It's good that Northwestern is taking action. Hopefully that they've informed each of the departments in the athletic department, again, that hazing will not be tolerated. But it's sort of sad if you think a major university is dependent on people monitoring the locker rooms to ensure that people are engaging in behavior that's appropriate. I mean, they have an anti-hazing policy, Northwestern. The anti-hazing policy is very strict. All they needed to do was enforce it. And to constantly put this on the student athletes who are the victims here and not the coaches. What about if the head of the department said to every coach, hazing's not tolerated. Be on the lookout for it. If you see it, stop it. That's where it should start. It should start on the front end, not the back end.
And we do know that members of the Northwestern football team themselves have released a statement saying that they don't tolerate hazing. Jen Cascio, your law firm is also representing other football players. Only a few have identified themselves publicly. Why is it important for them to remain anonymous?
Well, I think what their request for anonymity really tells us is actually the serious effects that the hazing has on these student athletes and the culture of Northwestern as an institution. These are individuals who want to speak out but are incredibly fearful for the repercussions that it can have on them in terms of coming out, as well as the female athletes, the same issue. She was retaliated against after the hazing incident was deemed by Northwestern to be hazing. That was their official conclusion. She was retaliated against. All of these individuals fear that they will have serious repercussions for coming out, and that's not because of anything they have done. It's because of the culture and the institutionalized systemic fear and harassment that occurred with these athletes.
Okay, of course, this is a story we'll all be following as it expands. Stephen Levin and Jen Cascio, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Chicago's Watchdog is up next. Stay with us.
Some prominent current and former Chicago elected officials are in ethics hot water. This after the city's inspector general found probable cause for violations, including using public office to solicit campaign support, and another public official allegedly using his public office to retaliate against a resident who was critical of him. Joining us now is Chicago Inspector General Deborah Witzberg to talk about some of these cases and where the office is going in general. Always good to see you. The first case here, former elected official sends campaign emails to, or her campaign does, to city employees at those employees' official city email accounts. We have confirmed, and a spokesperson for former Mayor Lightfoot confirmed, she is indeed the subject of this probe. Why did this conduct, in your eyes, violate the ethics code?
So I won't speak to the identity of the subject here, but the problem here, the ethical violation, is that the authority of a city office, a city title, the power that belongs to a city official, those things the power that is exercised by a city official, those things belong to the people of the city of Chicago. And the individuals sitting in city offices, occupying city titles, do not get to use those things for their personal political benefit.
And we should note that these emails were soliciting campaign support. What kind of recourse is there? What kind of fine does this individual face then from the ethics board?
So we found violations of these rules. We sent our findings to the Board of Ethics and asked that they find probable cause to believe that these violations occurred. They did so in this case, and so what happens next is that the subject of an investigation has an opportunity to go before the board and refute the findings.
Is intention an important thing to prove here? Because you could surmise that city workers signed up for campaign emails using their city emails, perhaps.
Yeah. I don't want to comment too much on the specific facts of this investigation, but I will say generally some important things to consider would be the scale of the problem, how many emails we were talking about, how long that went on for, whether an official had been notified of the problem, and the content of those emails. If we have someone using the authority of their city office to solicit donations from people over whom they exercise supervisory authority, that's a real problem.
And I should mention that our own Heather Sharon has written a lot about this. There were a lot of emails that she has written about. Folks can find that on our website. Another current elected official that you have found has perhaps abused his authority, an alderperson that we have confirmed is 45th Ward Alderman Jim Gardner, allegedly retaliated against a resident by hatching a scheme to issue unfounded citations worth thousands of dollars against that resident. Explain this case to us.
So again, I won't confirm the identity of the subject, but the allegations there that we sustained and on which the Board of Ethics found probable cause is that a sitting alderperson used the authority of their office to, exactly as you say, retaliate against someone who had been publicly critical of the alderperson's political positions.
And this is another case that would go before the ethics board to get adjudicated, and this person could face how much in fines?
Up to $20,000 per violation in fines.
It does seem like your office and the ethics board has been more aggressive in recent years in probing ethics violations or potential ethics violations. Is that a result of your office expanding your scope into that, or are more public officials simply participating in this conduct?
It's a result, in my view, of our more intentional focus on rigorous enforcement of the ethics rules. These are the rules that stand between us and government illegitimacy. We talk a lot about trying to pay down the deficit of legitimacy at which Chicago operates with its residents, and this is the kind of thing we're after here. So we are pursuing these cases more rigorously, more consistently, and more frequently than we used to.
So clearly you feel this is important, this is in the public interest, even though some of these cases might just result in fines of thousands of dollars. This is something that you believe is important to your office.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You also did an investigation into a private citizen, a building owner who allegedly attempted to bribe a building inspector by stuffing cash into his shirt pocket to avoid citations. Is this also an expansion of the scope of your office? Private citizens that might be engaging with public officials, perhaps in a way that violates the ethics code.
Absolutely. This is, in my view, our fully occupying our mandate to enforce the ethics rules. A member of the public can violate the city's ethics ordinance by attempting to bribe a city official. That's what we found happened here, is that someone attempted to bribe this building official. We are really clear, and we need to all be really clear that City Hall is not for sale and that the rules apply to everybody.
My message here might be that public officials can come to your office then if things like this, if they find things like this that happen.
Absolutely. And the building inspector in this case did in fact report the incident, didn't accept the bribe, committed no misconduct.
Does seem like Chicago might be ready for reform, or at least some public officials are. The City Council recently changed the city law to limit the City Inspector General term to 2 4-year terms. Your predecessor served for 12 years. Why is 8 years enough in this job, do you believe?
I think term limits are important for general sort of good government principles. I think that transition and new perspective are important. They should be balanced against institutional knowledge and experience. Term limits are a good idea for the Presidency of the United States and the Director of the FBI. I think that the term limit preserves the independence of the work of this office, where the person sitting in this seat should be neither too close in relationship to city officials nor too acrimonious with them. And those of us privileged to serve in this position should be building the office for robust and stable transition long after we are gone from this job.
And we need to remind viewers that you are not elected. I mean, you are selected by the mayor and confirmed by City Council to serve in this job. How do you avoid a situation that the city found itself in this time, where they waited almost a year, basically, before they could fill this position.
Yeah. So those issues are addressed in the ordinance that just passed as well, where there are improvements to the selection process for a new IG so that that process moves more quickly, is more transparent, and the ordinance sets up what needs to happen within the Office of Inspector General during that transition for more stability and independence of the office.
All right, Inspector General Deborah Witzberg, a lot on your plate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Brandis, we go back to you.
In Paris, that's our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Our Spotlight Politics team gives us a status report on 2 of Mayor Johnson's big campaign promises. And the Silver Room Block Party prepares for its last dance in Hyde Park. Now for Paris Schutz and all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.